So over the past few weeks, me and a channel known as PsychonautVisions have been working on a psychedelic Q&A styled collab where we both made up and shared with each other 10 different questions and recorded our responses to those and sent them to each other. And we're going to be using those clips to make our own videos of those responses. And you can find his, it might, on that channel. It might be up by the time this video is up, it might not be, but I will put a link to their channel in the description. But I feel this was a really cool opportunity, not only for me, but for the two that made that channel. And I feel it's just a good way to further spread the word and spread the knowledge of what these things are doing and what they're like, what they can be like, what they're over dramatically made out to be, things of that nature. So here's the Q&A. So before I get into the Q&A, I just want to preface that this channel that I collabed with is actually run by two people together. So each question that I asked, they made two separate clips of each of them giving their different responses. So here's the Q&A. Question 1. What got you guys into psychedelics?
What got me into psychedelics? That's a great question. I think for a lot of people, they kind of have a similar answer as me. I was just scrolling through YouTube one day and randomly happened to scroll past a video that said my first ever trip on psychedelic mushrooms. And I was really intrigued. I'd never done anything other than smoke weed or something like that, but I wanted to learn more about it, so I watched it. And he said he was like really happy throughout the trip. It was a pretty basic video, but I started doing a little more research, and eventually I ended up telling my friends about it, and that's what led to me getting into it. So that was pretty much the beginning process of getting into psychedelics, and specifically mushrooms.
Alright, so what got me into psychedelics was probably the same way that he did. We were just going along with the video, and this was when I was going through my withdrawal period for an addiction. And this addiction was a THC wax addiction included with Juul nicotine pods. And it was a gnarly withdrawal period, psychological withdrawal and everything. And I was looking for something that could have possibly made me feel better. And we didn't necessarily jump right into it and get shrooms right away, but we did find somebody, and Will here ended up trying psychedelics for his first time in January, soon after we discovered what psychedelics were. But I ended up having to back out last second because my girlfriend wanted me to, because she didn't want me to get into another drug. But she changed her mind after that later on, and I ended up getting into psychedelics in April of 2019, and that's when it just really opened up my mind and set in stone what was going to happen in my life from there forward.
Question 2. Was tripping anything like what you expected it to be, or did it completely surprise you?
Me, tripping was not really exactly what I expected it to be. I'd say some of the visuals were definitely similar to what I researched and what I was expecting, but in terms of the body feeling, the head feeling, and just it was really euphoric, which I was not expecting. So it was really different than how I expected, and I didn't really get too many insane visuals the first time. So it was mainly just a body high and a really euphoric feeling throughout my body that I felt the first time. So to answer your question, no, it really wasn't what I was expecting.
So tripping, I thought that I was just gonna magically come out a different person than before, and I did, in a sense, but not the way that I thought I would. I thought I would just feel better maybe for a couple days, and it would be this and that. But the visuals I got, I remember at the beginning of my trip, I was driving over to the park that we tripped at, and I remember just feeling numb in my legs and my feet, and my head was tingly, and I started freaking out, and I was starting to panic because I was feeling it so fast. And that's an anomaly. I believe that's really an anomaly to feel shrooms like that fast after ingesting them for 5 minutes. And I got out of the car and I was breathing and hyperventilating, and I started looking at the ground, and that's when my visuals kicked in, and I saw the ground breathing out on me, these plants looking extremely green and beautiful in mid-spring. And I really didn't expect all of this. I felt the most joyous feeling I've ever felt in my life. I felt like a child. I felt like I was reborn again, and my depression was uplifted. So yeah, to answer your question, it definitely was not what I expected it to be. It was a lot more than I expected it to be.
Question 3. Have you ever had ego death on psychedelics? And if so, how would you define it?
So I've never experienced an ego death while on psychedelics, and I wouldn't say I've ever really been that close to one. But at the same time, one of the ways you can get close to an ego death is by spinning around uncontrollably. And in one of my trips, my most insane one, which is a heroic dose video, which was one of our most recent videos, I was actually spinning around just constantly, and I was kind of distracted, which is why I stopped. And had I kept going, who knows what would have happened? Do I think I would have had an ego death? Not really. But that is sort of the way you can kind of get towards an ego death, is just by continuously spinning around. So no, I've never experienced an ego death. I believe that at some point in my life I probably will, and I don't know really what to expect too much from it, but no, I have never experienced an ego death.
So I've never experienced an ego death myself, and that's partially because of the fact that I trip with friends. But one way you can get into an ego death is by listening to Spongel. It does all this crazy ass music that they play to alter your state of consciousness and bring you up into this other state of being that basically kind of makes you just trip out even more. Ego death, I would define it as something that is a complete loss of yourself, complete loss of sense of reality, and just a complete loss of actually your ego, which is what protects you from the outside world by defending yourself and being offended by things. You're no longer offended by things, and you feel united with the universe as one.
Question 4. What was the first thing to change about you after you started tripping?
So what was the first thing I noticed after I started tripping? It's a great question, and for me personally, I started really noticing things about the world. I started noticing, obviously we mentioned before, we noticed nature, and just how the world works, really. I'd say that's a big thing. I noticed kind of more about myself. I started really reflecting more, self-reflecting a lot more. And I basically just realized, I had all these realizations. And before I didn't really know anything much about myself. I didn't know a whole lot of things that I was interested in, other than just basic things like video games and sports. But now I've started to realize more things about myself, and I've become more aware of how the world works and how society works too. And obviously, like I said, my appreciation for nature and the world around us has definitely grown.
So the first thing that changed for me was definitely my perspective on life. Before I was tripping, I thought of life as just this one depressing thing that everyone had to go through and not do shit about it. But after tripping, I realized that I am a singular person who doesn't really need anybody else. I'm someone who can be just fine on my own, someone who realizes the true beauty of all life around me, that there's nothing more pure than life itself, and that we can't be ruining the planet.
For question 5, have you ever felt like you missed out on a spiritual experience on psychedelics because you were distracted by someone/something?
So have I ever missed out on a spiritual experience because I was distracted by someone? Well, I've never tripped alone, and I plan on doing that sometime in the future, maybe even the near future. I've never tripped alone, so every time I've tripped is with my friends, and I guess you could say that sometimes when you're with your friends, you can get distracted by their thoughts, whatever they're saying. So yeah, I guess you could say I have. And like I said earlier, when I was spinning around, if I wasn't distracted by my friends, who knows what would have happened? Would I have just kept spinning and passed out? Who knows? So, I guess yes, but at the same time, I'm not exactly sure of any particular experience or moment that I missed out on a spiritual experience.
So I definitely have missed out on a spiritual experience before, and that was my trip in January in the winter time with my friends. Now I've tripped with my friends 4 times, but I've had a spiritual experience every time. We've been able to talk just fine, talk about our feelings, and talk about our passions and what we kind of want to improve upon. But this last trip, even though it seemed like the perfect trip to me, the more I look back on it, I realized that it just wasn't perfect in the sense that I didn't get everything out I needed to.
Question 6. If you were to make one guess as to why we see the things we do on psychedelics, what would it be?
Alright, so if I had to make one guess as to why you see the things you do while on psychedelics, I would say that a lot of it is the world's gift to us, Mother Nature's gift to us. Mushrooms in particular date as far back as we can even remember, like when Mayans and Aztecs were using them, and they would talk to the gods basically. So I would say a lot of it has to do with it being Mother Earth's gift to us.
So the way I think about the psychedelic experience and why you see these certain things really just depends on what is going on in your subconscious mind at the time, and also how it's just projected from your subconscious behavior, which is brought up through your body and then through your mind, and then basically all that energy comes out through your body and through your head on what you're seeing through your visuals. And also on top of that, reality distorts itself as well, to the point where reality just collapses on itself depending on what dose you're on. So if you're on a low dose, you'll see saturated colors and maybe some light visual effects, but that's just a very small amount of reality collapsing on itself. And then once you get to those high doses where your visuals are completely covered from closed-eyed to open-eyed, it's just the same exact thing each way, reality completely is collapsed on itself, and you're able to see the true extent of the universe and how divine the world is.
Question 7. Do you think certain psychedelics are more/less spiritual than others?
So I think pretty much all psychedelics are very spiritual. They just have different effects on you visually, maybe body load. Obviously there's different doses for each substance pretty much, so you're going to get different experiences with each one of them, and you may reach different highs and lows, but I think they're all pretty spiritual. So yeah, I think obviously I've only done shrooms, one time LSD, so I can't speak off too many experiences there, but yeah, I think they're very similar.
Okay, so just to elaborate on what Will was saying, because I basically believe everything that he says about it, and I think that psychedelics are all the same in terms of spirituality. Ayahuasca definitely affects you differently because of the DMT that's within it, and then psilocybin is also a different experience as well. But as your mate Tom, super popular YouTube video or YouTuber that people watch, he says that these high doses of shrooms are very similar to ayahuasca, and that he used to not take shrooms seriously because he thought, oh, shrooms, it's nothing compared to ayahuasca. But he says that on these really high doses, they're extremely similar, and that psychedelics all have this way of tuning into your spirituality. So I don't think that there's any psychedelic out there that's more or less spiritual than the other.
Question 9. Do you think psychedelics are slowly reintegrating themselves back into our lives, or that it's just another wave of psychedelic lovers as there was in the 60s and 70s?
Alright, so I definitely say psychedelics are gaining a lot of popularity pretty rapidly actually, and the psychedelic community is actually way bigger than a lot of people realize, and it's because people don't understand until they have tried psychedelics what they actually are really. So they were actually very popular like in the 60s and 70s before they went underground after being classified as a Schedule 1 controlled substance by the government, and ever since then they've lost a lot of their popularity, but they're definitely gaining a lot recently.
Okay, so psychedelics, I think that they're definitely gaining a lot more popularity, and people are rediscovering them and realizing that they're not as bad as they've been portrayed for so many years, because in the 70s, the counterculture movement in the 60s and 70s, they threw it away and they made it illegal and said that people were dying and having these bad trips and killing themselves, which wasn't necessarily true. And it gave this stigma to psychedelics, that this stigma that they're a drug, just another drug that people would classify next to drugs like heroin and meth. But it's not like that whatsoever. And what psychedelics do is they give you the power to realize what your problems are and give you the key to solving these problems, but it's up to you to solving these problems ultimately.
And for the final question, all in all, what is your favorite aspect of the psychedelic experience?
So my favorite aspect of the psychedelic experience, there's definitely many parts that are amazing and blessings, but if there's one part in particular that I would say is my favorite aspect, I would probably say the part when I'm coming down and I feel reborn and connected to just everything. Having a conversation while coming down and explaining what you experienced and just having a really deep conversation, it's an amazing experience. And honestly, I would probably say that's my favorite part of the experience.
So my favorite part of the psychedelic experience is definitely my connection to nature and the realization that the outside world has a purpose, that everything in this world has a purpose, including all the plants, all the insects, all the people, all the animals, everything. People don't realize that everything has a spirit to it, and everything has an energy to it, this negative and positive energy. And when you're outside around nature, especially in the psychedelic experience, and when I'm climaxing in nature, I just feel this pure joy and positive energy that always comes out every time. That's definitely my favorite part of the psychedelic experience.
So that was really fun to make. I want to give a big thank you to PsychonautVisions for reaching out and offering to do that in the first place. I probably wouldn't have asked to do a collab together. So thank you, PsychonautVisions, for being adamant about doing that. I had fun doing it. I feel like it was a good opportunity to, like I said in the beginning, to further spread the word and the knowledge of what these things are doing to people and whole cultures and communities of how people carry their lives. So once again, thank you, PsychonautVisions. Check them out. There's the other half of this Q&A, which is my responses to their questions, which will be uploaded to their channel. I think today, but I'm not sure when this is going to be uploaded. So go check that out. Thank you again, PsychonautVisions. I hope you all enjoyed this.